Welcome to Adventure Nannies on Air. Today's episode was recorded live during one of our summit sessions as a part of our free ongoing educational webinar series to support nannies and professional childcare providers to elevate their careers and enhance their skills. If you like what you hear, you can catch the full episode on our YouTube channel or register for our next summit session at adventurenannies.com/summit-sessions. Welcome, everybody, to today's summit session. My name is Reagan Fulton. I'm the marketing director here at Adventure Nannies, and today, I am so excited to talk to somebody who I've been trying to get on for a summit session for so long, and the stars finally aligned to bring him on, the incredible Sean Hines. So welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Before I let Sean jump in and kind of give us a little intro and tell us about himself, just a quick housekeeping reminder. I don't have to do these housekeeping reminders because no one's here yet, but if people join, I'll give them. Gonna skip those. But this is a live summit session, blah, blah, blah. Gonna skip that. Thank you. Okay, Sean. So go ahead and tell us a little bit about who you are, and especially we would love to hear about what brought you into nannying and your nanny journey to
Yeah,
bring you to today.
of
So I'll
course,
give you the
of
floor.
course. Yeah. Well, thank you for that introduction. I'm thrilled to be here. And like you said, the stars aligned, and we gotta, we gotta figure it out. Yeah, most of you guys don't know me. My name's Sean Hines. I wear many hats. Currently, I just accepted a nanny role, so I've been moving across the country, crazy in a couple weeks. But when I'm not nannying, I founded a nonprofit. So I run a nonprofit called the Limitless Project. And then I just moved gears from the teaching world as well. So I have 6 years of teaching experience, special education here in Michigan. And then in tandem, as well as on the side, I nannied as well. So I kind of started nannying and caregiving, and then I went to school to be a special education teacher, graduated and got my first degree, or my first job in special ed, and then taught for this will be my 6th year, and then now I'm transitioning back into the nanny role. So yeah, it just depends on the day, but I wear many hats, but
Apps.
what it really stems to is just advocating for people. I've
Absolutely.
been a people advocate for a while, so
The first thing that I heard about you, Sean, was like it was a picture post, and it was like, gotta hear about this guy. And it was a picture of you like backpacking in the mountains. And it was
yeah,
like he backpacks with special needs kids so they can go mountain climbing too. And I
yeah,
just bawled. I just
yeah.
it instantly burst. I love so much. So tell me a little bit, what led you into that? I'm really interested in what led you. Is there a story or a piece of your life that kind of led you into this special needs advocacy, or what is your why?
Yeah,
What made you want to do this and be an advocate for special needs and disabled
right.
folks? Is it something in your personal life, professional life?
Yeah.
Because I think that's really special, and your passion for that is just, unmatched. So I want to hear more about
Thank you.
that.
Yeah. To answer your question, both personally and professionally, there was a couple moments that kind of led me to the where we are now, I guess. It started from a very young age. I knew I saw the world differently my whole life. I just knew I just gravitated towards people that needed help. So I think I was about 5 years old going to my first Tigers game. It's a professional baseball game, here in Detroit. And, as a kindergartner, you're just living life. You just ride your bike and there's not a worry in the world. And, you're worrying about what mac and cheese flavor you're going to have for lunch. But the Tigers game, I went with my aunt, my godmother, and it was very eye opening because that was the first homeless population I've ever seen. So I got to see a world that people were suffering and people were, struggling with even feeding themselves. And I remember this one gentleman specifically. He didn't have any legs. Very cold day. It was a fall day, windy day. And his shirt was all tattered and everything. And I just could not stop enjoying the game. We went to the game and I just could not stop thinking about what I could do, at 5 years old. And anyway, long story short, I tried to give him my shirt off my back, not knowing, that
Right.
it's
That
not
that's
gonna fit.
literally the saying.
So anyway, we ended up getting him a meal and getting him, a place, and that made me feel really good. I just felt good. At 5 years old, I just didn't know what that led to in life. So anyway, fast forward, I just viewed life with those lenses of, who needs help
Oh,
and who
yeah,
can
that's
I
such an
help, and
impressionable age, and for that to have that impactful
yeah,
moment so
absolutely.
young, yeah.
Absolutely. And so I took that mentality into high school, and I did what we call a peer-to-peer program. So we basically work with students in special education, and you befriend them and you mentor them and you model and you just really be a friend, And whether that's helping them with their homework or just being in gym class and helping, anxiety change in the changing room or whatever. And I loved it. I loved it so much. I would actually skip some of my classes to go do that more, and teachers would write me passes and it was great. But my senior year, I decided I had that was the first moment of advocacy that I said, man, prom is coming around the corner and it's the jewel of high school, right? Everybody wants to go to prom and it's like the capstone, if you will, to your 4 years. And I wanted to take one of the kids in special education that never had the opportunity. So I presented the idea and the teacher just broke down crying. And I was like, wow, it took me off guard. I didn't know if I was even doing the right thing.
Right.
And she said, Sean, and I've been doing this for 30 years. I've never had one of my students been asked to prom. I think that's incredible. So anyway, I spent more and more time, in the classroom trying to figure out who wants to go and who should I take. Long story short, I couldn't decide. I had to take the whole class. So I
I'm
took
gonna cry now.
yes. Yeah, I took the whole class. I think there was 18 or 19 of us,
Wow.
and I bought them all flowers. I bought them all dinner. I danced with all of them, and it would really, as much of an impact as it made on them, it impacted my life tenfold, you know.
Yeah.
And that moment of, "Hey, I don't necessarily need to be the popular guy and the guy that's on the football team. I wanna be the guy that, people can look up to and
Mhm.
make that change and realize that it's okay to be different." So anyway, the night was just perfect. It was straight out of a fairy tale, and yeah, it just was incredible, incredible. So that kind of paved the path for my future, and that's, naturally why I went into nuclear engineering at first because
Naturally, naturally.
yeah, right, right, yeah. But no,
Um,
I decided, my sophomore year of college, I said, "Look, nuclear engineering is cool and I like it and it pays good, but this is not me. This is not where my heart's at. This is not my passion." So I switched to special ed, and just the rest is has laid the groundwork for everything else. So
well, that's incredible. Even, when you're talking about the impact and, you know, from a personal perspective, I have a cousin who's grew up in special education and I wish you were closer to me. She would love to go on adventures with you.
for sure.
But just thinking about her and her high school experience, and she had great peer-to-peer
Yeah,
programs in her school, but just the impacts that those did make
for sure.
is, like you said, it impacted you and, you think it may be more than others, but it really truly does make such an impact on those
Yeah,
lives. And, you were talking, taking everybody to prom, giving them the experience that so many of us take for granted.
right.
That when the teacher said that none of her students had ever been asked, and that's just something that, so many
Yeah,
of us take for granted. So I see it, and I wanna kinda tie the line and lead it into Limitless Project and what you
yeah,
do with that because, you know, Pe everyone is limitless and they all have it,
of
and so
course.
you're giving, from my understanding, and I want you to expand and tell a little bit more, but you're giving anybody the opportunity to do anything essentially is your goal,
Yeah,
right? It doesn't matter if you're wheelchair bound, it doesn't matter if you
yeah,
have a developmental disability. If you want to do something that you will find a way to do it essentially
yep,
is kind of
yeah,
your goals.
you hit it
Tell
on
us
the head.
tell us more about that,
Yeah.
yeah.
Absolutely, you hit it right on the head. I founded the Limitless Project a couple years ago, and it was a moment when I was teaching a very profound class in Michigan. Some of the most impaired kiddos you'll ever meet. These are your kids that are in wheelchairs and usually nonverbal. They use a communication device. A lot of health impairments. You go through the list, right?
Yeah.
Um, and it was one Christmas break. We were off. I just took it for granted that I could just pack my life up and just take a vacation when I wanted. And I did. I drove to Florida by myself just because I wanted to. And I went swimming with the sharks and I went deep sea fishing and I went on the wild boar hunt. And it was crazy. It was like the best time of my life.
Yeah. It
And
was an adventure.
it was an adventure, yeah.
Yeah.
And the crazy thing is, you jump into the water full of sharks, and everybody should, a normal human reaction should, be a little bit fearful of that. And I jumped in the water, and the first thing that I thought was, man, I wish my kids at school could experience this, you know? And it was that moment that I had 18 hours on the drive back to say, ugh, I just can't stop thinking about that. I can just go whenever I want, do the things that I love to do. The kids that I teach and the population I serve can't. And society tells them no. Society says, no, that's too dangerous, or you're in a wheelchair. We can't get you on a boat, or it's not possible. So I came back, and with that thought in mind, I said, look, I've been going to school for a long time to adapt to life in the classroom, to help, you know, advocate there in the classroom. Why can't I do it outside of the classroom too? And to do these things and to make these opportunities for a population that desperately needs it. With that in mind, I filed, all the paperwork and started this nonprofit called the Limitless Project. And it was in depth.
Oh, yes,
It's a lot of work,
it is
but it
no
was
joke
worth it.
to become a nonprofit, that's for sure.
Yeah, it was, I kept telling myself, look, these kids are fighting for their life. Some of them, quite literally, in the most literal sense, I mean
Yeah.
that. The least I can do is fight to make sure it's a full life. And that was kind of what fueled my passion and my advocacy and everything, is to say, look, it's hard. It's hard work, but they're worth it. These kids, a lot of them were told that they weren't going to see their second birthday. And here they are at 20, 22 years old. And to me, I just don't think it's much of a life to sit on an iPad at school. Then you go home and get tethered to a screen, and you get fed the same meal every day. And life is just about sharing memories and laughing and meeting people. And, it doesn't have to be the big, crazy swim with sharks or climbing a mountain, but, let's have a conversation about, what do you want to do?
Mhm.
Regardless of your capability, let's find a way to make it happen. So that's kind of how that conversation started, is just to say, hey, what do people want to do? And what do people, what are the limitations that you think you have? And let's come together and find a way to kind of work around that. Yeah, that's kind of what stemmed the Limitless Project, is just, you know, creating those opportunities that I like to do. And they're just more enjoyable to share it with those that I love. So
I love
that's,
that.
yeah.
And I think you
Yeah.
really hit the nail on the head with something you said about, everyone should be able to experience this. And,
Yeah.
it isn't that they don't have the ability, it's that society says they don't, or that it's too hard.
Yeah.
And so I'm curious if you have any especially, tips or, what are like the biggest societal beliefs that you, especially in your work here, both in special education and specifically through the Limitless Project, what are those limiting beliefs that you most look to target or come
Yeah.
across most often with your clients or your patients?
Yeah.
I don't know
Yeah.
how you would
Students,
refer to
all of it. Yeah.
students,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
What limiting beliefs have you, noticed are most prevalent and especially the most easily challenged or overcome,
Yeah.
that, potentially nannies or other folks can take back into their work too and be able
The
to
big thing I see all the time is, especially with physical disabilities, society sees physical disabilities, whether that's you're wheelchair bound, or, spina bifida, or it's something that you can see, and immediately it's, well, they're written off,
yeah,
unfortunately, because it's something that you can see, and it's not a world most people live in. And admittedly, at first it is uncomfortable, to see somebody that either lost their legs, or is using an AAC device, or, whatever it may be, is not typical of society's norms. We live a life, and we just take it for granted that we get in our car and we drive to work and we do this and we go grocery shopping. So when you see something outside of that norm, I think a lot of times people pump the brakes. And I don't necessarily think it's intentional. I don't think people are being mean to be mean. I just think it's, they don't have the exposure, and they don't have, I guess, the mindset of
yeah,
and my biggest thing that I've told everybody in the classroom, outside of the classroom, people are people. And we all communicate in different ways, and we all have different personalities, and we're all just human at the end of the day. And, we play this game of life, and it's hard. It's a hard game. Life will beat you down at every opportunity. And what I tell people is you don't need to add to that. Life will be just fine doing that as is. But when you assume the first thing you see is someone in a wheelchair is that, oh, they probably have a cognitive impairment too because they're in a wheelchair. It goes in this spiral of
Mhm.
just incapability, you
Yep.
know. And the one thing I've seen as a teacher, as a nanny, as an advocate, as a founder of a company is the best thing you can do is just assume capability. You just have to assume that someone is cognitive, is able to do something, is able to communicate, is able to do all these things. And that just changes your whole perspective on life. If you can, even if you and I were to say, I'm not really sure I can do X, Y, and Z, like it's just a mentality thing. You just have to change that mentality to say, no, that's just society is telling me one thing, but it's just not true. There's
Mhm.
just no limits. The only limits we have are the ones we impose on ourselves. So we've seen time and time again, even kids, it's like a great opportunity when you see somebody in a wheelchair or you see someone that looks different or acts different. Kids often stare and I don't necessarily shun that because it's just them being curious. That's an opportunity for them to learn, to say, hey, there are people that look different and talk different and feel different, and that's okay. At the end of the day, we are all human, and we all desire to be loved and belonging, and we all want to live a full life.
My favorite line for that is, "Did you wanna go say hi?"
Yeah,
Like, "Do you wanna go say hi to them? Do you wanna introduce yourself?" Like, it's
right.
okay if you're curious. We can go
Yeah,
we can go introduce ourselves and say hi
right.
and
Yeah,
meet them,
right.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh,
It's just the exposure and letting people know that it's okay.
mhm,
It's I think sometimes the lack of reaction is a reaction enough.
yep,
Like it's okay. It's
yeah,
and I think that's part of teaching is especially the younger population is just to say, look, the norm is okay. It's not a scary thing.
yeah,
It's not anything you should be fearful of. It's changing that narrative around what is, okay and what's safe and what's normal is kind of the battle, and
yep,
that's cool with the Limitless Project and everything that I do is we want to show people that it's okay. We want to show people that you can go fishing and you can go rock climbing and do all these things despite your limitations. We'll find a way. You know, One
mhm,
example I always like to bring up, there's a gentleman, we went whitewater rafting last year. Really crazy. The waiver was
yeah,
pretty in depth. But this gentleman, he was in a car accident, lived a very normal life, and just like that, became paralyzed, lost a leg. Just in an instant, his life changed dramatically. And I said, "Hey, look, we're going on this whitewater rafting trip. I was told you might be interested." And he said, "Well, Sean, I'm paralyzed. I'm in a wheelchair. I said, "Yeah, and
yeah,
like,
what do you need to attend? Do you need some adaptations? Yeah, what do we need to make it happen? I love that.
yeah." And so I think people, themselves place these limits and to say
Mhm,
society has beat me down so much that I start to believe them. And it's my job and, one of my passions to say, look, none of that matters. I don't care that you're in a wheelchair. I don't care that this and that. So we had a great trip and he actually broke down and started to cry. So, Sean, I never thought I'd swim again, after my accident, let alone do a crazy whitewater rafting trip.
yeah,
And so it's just really changing that idea of to say, yeah, I'm capable and I'm able and, to prove that. It's just the only limits, like I said, are the ones we place on ourselves. To change that narrative is you just have to be consistent and you have to show up and you have to, you know, fight the good fight, if you will.
absolutely.
Yeah.
I love that so much. I'm curious, I know you talked a little bit about like how you push and why it's important for, the disabled folks and the folks who are different to be seen as, included and as not different and as, what is the norm. But I'm also curious if you have anything to say about like why it is important for kids, especially that, if you're a nanny going into a home,
Yeah.
not just from a societal aspect, but I know there is, and I know you probably know there is, but like why is it important
Yeah.
for them to be a successful human to have this exposure and to have this?
Yeah.
Why does it matter for, neurotypical,
Yeah.
developmentally typical kids to have
Sure.
this exposure and care about it?
Great. Great. Yeah. Great point that you brought that up. I don't want to say, I don't, it's not all about me, but it kind of stems back to, when I was 5 years old at a Tigers game, it's just kids don't know what they don't know, and adults too. And a lot of these families, especially these nanny families, they live in a bubble that is not realistic for most of society. It's just very isolated. They know what they know, and that's it. But once you get outside of that bubble, that's really when you start to learn and you start to grow and you start to see that there are problems in this world that, need solving, and injustices, and whether it's disabilities or whatever it is, there is something to be said about being passionate about caring. I think people get wrapped up in society all the time, especially kids, of, what do I want for Christmas? And they want the material things and they want the screen time. And adults, likewise too. It's, you're like, when am I going to get paid? And my paycheck was late and I want this car and this house. And we just get caught up in this game of life, and we're all guilty of it. I'm guilty of it. But I think really what it stems down to, if you want to be a contributing human to society, is you just have to give more than you take. That's it. It really is as simple as that. And people get so bent out of shape when, it's all wants, and needs, but they don't realize how impactful it is to give and to give and to give. So I think it's especially important for kids because it's one at a pivotal age. Kids soak up, they're like sponges, and they will regurgitate and, be models of what you feed them and what you experience, and all of these things, to show them that there are people that are hurting despite, you might have a house over your head, or you might have ability to do whatever you please. Not everybody has that situation. And just, like I said, to promote that giving more than you take is, so, the one thing that I could just promote, if you take one thing away from this, is that's really as simple as life gets. You know, I don't care what disability you are, how rich you are, how poor you are. If you can give more than you take, that's it. The world would be a different place, you know? So teaching those kids to say, hey, look, let's give back a little bit. Let's say, hey, there's, a homeless shelter down the road. Maybe we do a cooking class and we bake some cookies or whatever it may be. And just to say, hey, I see you, I acknowledge you, and, let's help in any way we can. I think that's what, separates people that just go through life and, whether they're successful or not, they just play the game of life and they give the next bigger toy and the next bigger this and that, to the real leaders in this world and the real people that just want to just make the world a better place, is just to, you know, give what you can with what time you have, and, you know, it doesn't have to be boring along the way. I love what I do. I love what I
Yeah.
do, and
You have to do whitewater rafting, yeah.
right, it's those moments that people don't realize it's fun, and it makes you feel good as a human to say, "Hey, we made this happen." And, it was hard, but so is life, and we have to do hard things in life, and, what a better opportunity to teach kids to say, there are hard things and we can do it together, but let's do it together and make sure that we're doing it with best intentions, and, that we want to give what we can. So,
I
yeah,
love it.
it's such a pivotal age.
I love it, and I'm curious because you said something about, these families often, if you can hire a nanny, you might live in a little bit of a bubble,
Yeah,
a lot of times even the parents might not have had exposure to different kinds of, whether it be wealth or other societal inequities or disabilities. They themselves might not quite see the value. So I'm curious if you have any, obviously you mentioned, baking cookies and taking them to the homeless shelter, and there's those kind of bigger
yeah,
things that you can do. But, not every nanny family is going to be, want you to take as a nanny to take their kids to
of
downtown
course.
Detroit, and what I can only assume, I think we're about the same age as the
Yeah,
early 2000s, right?
Yeah,
I'm not sure that most families would be comfortable with that. That kind
yeah,
of experience might not be you might not be able to give that directly. So I'm curious
yeah,
about, and or either ways to talk to the parents about why you want to involve their kids in some of these. I know you just gave us the true why, but if there's any
yeah,
strategy to help maybe soften that, because I do know
yeah,
that some families can be a little bit almost like, you don't want to offend a family and be like,
yeah,
I
of
need to
course.
go make your child worldly, because that's not what it's
Yeah,
about
right,
either.
right.
But so how do you approach that conversation, or potentially also smaller things like whether it be books or certain, music,
Yeah,
things like that that you can use to expose as well without those kind of bigger elements.
yeah. Well, you mentioned books. Books are a huge, huge learning tool, and just as kids are intuitive to what they read and listen to, so are adults. So if you could pick out literature that is inclusive, that has a kid that is in a wheelchair or is of different color, different race, that is just something a little bit outside of their norm, whatever their bubble is, their world. If you could start with a book, and it could be a children's book, it could be a nice, easy children's book, and there are so many books. And what I would do is just kind of have that external thought to say, hey, why does he look different? Or why do they sound different? Or, while you're reading it, we do this a lot in the classroom, is just to think out loud while you're reading something. It sparks a conversation to say, hey, maybe there are some different opportunities and different things. It doesn't have to be going baking cookies to a homeless shelter. As a matter of fact, a lot of families would probably frown on that. But, it could be something as simple as, let's say you're writing a Mother's Day card or whatever, and you could say, "Wow, I wonder what it would be like, if my mother was deaf." And then you can talk about Braille, and you can talk about all these different ways to communicate and feel that, it's very situational, and it depends on the family. And of course, nothing has to be a home run. That's not what I'm saying. Is more of just the conversation,
For planted seeds, yeah.
the plant of seeds, and yeah, and you want to, if you want your child to be a contributing member to society, you should expose them to society, it's just, like I said, it's very situational. It depends on the family, depends on where they're at and what they want. But, I would really just chalk it up to exposure, as small as it may be, as first. And then you can kind of build on that exposure, and, maybe you go to the community and you see someone in a wheelchair, and you could, you know, say, "Hey, let's say hi, or let's introduce ourselves," or, you can just kind of build on those seeds like you mentioned. And, some families, you might be able to say, "Hey, I wanna go on a mission trip," or, "I wanna go, take my the kid I'm nannying for, to a homeless shelter," or whatever it may be. You may be able to hit the ground running with a family that
Yeah.
that wants that. But, for those that don't, just having that exposure early in a little seed, in a little conversation here, in a little book, in a little, social media thing or whatever. And then, grow that and water that and nurture that into something that is fruitful and meaningful.
I love it. Those are
Yeah.
such great tips, and I think that that's, as a nanny, that's your whole job, right?
Right.
Is to plant those seeds. I am
Yeah.
curious, for anybody, we talked a little bit about like how you can with as a nanny, but for somebody who's interested in getting more into the advocacy side as you are, I'm curious if you can talk a little bit more about the disability advocacy world in
Yeah.
general and some possibly some misconceptions about the work you do, the world that is,
Yeah.
and then how people can get involved too
For
and
sure.
support
For sure.
both, whether it be in their own community locally,
Yeah.
and just becoming an advocate and also supporting the Limitless Project.
Yeah. Well, as I'm sure you know, being an advocate is hard, and nobody talks about, the shortcomings and the hardships of being a true advocate. You're going to be met with a lot of opposition. By definition, that is what advocacy is. You're supporting a group that's already been discriminated against, or, whatever it may be. It's hard. And I think, what's helped me in the past is just to know that I'm not doing this for me. I'm not advocating for myself. I'm doing this for a population that can't advocate for themselves. And, it kind of lights a fire in you, or I hope it will light a fire in you to say, look, here's a population that's being discriminated against. to be shunned or whatever it may be. Let's pick it apart a little bit. I think a lot of the misconceptions around advocacy is everybody wants to jump into advocacy and be this, rah rah advocate. And really it's not as efficient as just narrowing your focus to say, "Hey, I'm really passionate about knitting or cooking or baking or adventures. What can I do that I'm already passionate about that I can make it inclusive, that I can advocate?" So my biggest piece of advice is just really narrow your focus. I personally love adventuring and I love getting my adrenaline going and, all these things. Hence why I created a nonprofit dedicated to that. It's things that I already love to do. And it makes advocacy that much easier, to say, "Hey, I want to go climb a mountain." Well, okay. I already planned it in my head. Now it's just one step further to say, "Okay, let's make it inclusive for someone who has a disability." So I would really just hone on just one specific thing, and then you can grow from there. Once you kind of rally the troops, if you will, that grows, and we created a ripple effect, and more people are advocating and more people are advocating, and before you know it, we're changing society. Yeah, just to start small, with what you already do well, with what you already are passionate about, and maybe you're already an advocate for. You can expand those horizons just a little bit. We call it the foot in the door phenomenon. If you can get your foot in the door, you can walk everybody else through. So we even see that with people themselves. We want people to be an advocate for themselves. And, that example of that gentleman we took, whitewater rafting, everybody is, after a life changing event you go through some stuff. You go through some psychology that is pretty negative towards yourself, and you think that your life is over. And being able to say, "Hey, not only do I think you're capable," but teaching them that they are themselves capable. It's one thing to push and be a leader, but it's another thing to lead from behind, if you will, and push people to be advocates themselves, to relearn that or maybe even learn that for the first time. That look, just because something is said to you from a societal standpoint does not mean that that is the law and that is what's written. We got to just rewrite our own book. Yeah, it's just, again, it's very situational, very depends on each person. But, the biggest thing of being an advocate is just being an advocate. It's selfless.
Yeah.
And it's going to be met with opposition, and it's going to be met with people that don't share your same beliefs. And, that's okay. People can disagree, and, we can still be humans. We can still have interactions. We can still respect each other. So if you understand that, it's gonna you're gonna be met. I can tell you from day one, you're gonna be met with opposition, and from the finish line, you're gonna be met with opposition. And you just have to be okay with what level of opposition that is. Some schools will really push back to say, "Hey, this nonprofit that you're doing is really disadvantageous to our kids and unsafe, and you're putting them in harm's way." But you have to be okay with saying, "Look, I know this is the right thing. I know that, through communication and through what they want and all of that, you have to be their backbone. You have to be the ones to almost take those hits because, they've been beat down for life for so long. You almost have to step in front of them and be their shield and to take those hits, and you have to be okay with that. And, not everybody is. It's not easy to have a target on your back, and it's not easy to constantly be deflecting, opposition. But, that's just one of those things you have to look at yourself in the mirror and say, "Look, it's worth it." It's worth the fight. It's worth the negative comments. It's worth this and that, because at the end of the day, you're fighting for someone's life. And that's just invaluable to me.
Absolutely. That's so beautiful. I'm really curious if you have any tips because I think in my experience in any advocacy I've done, one of the hardest things, especially when you are coming from a place of privilege, is the balance of what you kind of just talked about of stepping in and being the shield and stepping back and allowing their voices to be amplified and
Yeah.
not overpowering too. And I you said something about fighting when they can't fight for themselves, and then you circled it back around and made it all made sense. But I thought back to the Capitol crawl of the '90s, and even just the fact that the ADA, for those who don't know, ADA only exists because disabled folks themselves literally crawled the steps of the
Yeah.
Capitol,
Right.
um, when no one else would fight for them and fought for themselves to get that
Yeah.
law overturned. And, that kind of balance. And, and if you and I had walked up those Capitol steps in the 1990s and demanded the same thing, I don't know that it would have had the same effect either. And
Right.
so it's just
Right.
this constant balance, I think,
Yeah.
of when to step in, when to step back. And I'm curious, I think you talked a little bit about what the balance is, but if there's any, quick one-liners you ask yourself or questions you ask yourself when you're like, do I step in? Do I step back?
Yeah.
To help you
Yeah.
make those decisions of like where is my place, or people you ask, or how you deal with that.
Yeah. It is. It's a very challenging balance. It's and I don't think there's necessarily a right answer. I don't think there's to say, hey, this is the right moment to step in and this is the right moment to step out. I think laying the groundwork, working with individuals with disabilities and working with kids and adults beforehand, before you get into that moment, is really when you should be stepping in and be full force to say, hey, I'm here for you. I got you. And then, promoting that independence to say, when you're in that moment, I'll be here. I'll be here if you need me, but you need to advocate for yourself too. This is your fight as well. So like I said, it's hard to say because that is really a great question. And every situation is going to be different. Every advocacy situation, every moment. A lot of the population I work with are nonverbal, so advocacy is almost constant, right? They
Yep.
can't speak up for themselves, or they don't have the cognitive ability to have that thought process to say, "Oh, I think someone's doing me wrong." So, of course, there's gonna be a lot more support, a lot more advocacy up front, and to be that shield, if you will, versus someone who is cognitively able and can communicate. That groundwork has to be laid beforehand, before you get into, whatever
You have
moment
to
it
know
may.
who you're advocating for.
Right, right, yeah, exactly. That's really what it boils down to is what do they need and what supports do they need, and being there, I think that's the biggest thing is following through with that support. If they need it, if they need someone who's gonna be that soldier on the front lines and that rah-rah guy, great. You need to be that guy or girl. But if they need, someone who's a little bit more hands off and more support in the background, then great. You need to be that too. But like you said, I think it really boils down to just knowing your population and knowing who you're advocating for, and those kind of wins will work itself out to through the process, if you will work itself out. Just be the best advocate you can, but also promoting their independence. You don't want to hand them everything. You don't nor would I want things handed to me.
Yeah.
I should have every right to work for what I want, and, as do people with disabilities. You just might have to get a little bit creative on what that looks like. But yeah, knowing when to step in, it's there's never going to be a right answer. There's never going to be a black and white. It's always going to be a gray scale. But, knowing your population is probably the biggest thing for sure.
I love that.
Yeah.
Um, Amazing. We talked a lot about like where it came from, the whys, the hows. What is the Limit Project doing right now? How
Yeah.
can people get involved? I know like you said, you're getting ready to move cross country. So
Yeah.
I hope you're not also trying to do a big project at the same time, but like how can
Yeah.
we support you? What are you getting involved in right now? Yeah.
Well, the cool thing is when I created this project is I knew that I wasn't going to be in Michigan forever. So I created it with the mindset of it can be fluid. I can do it whenever, wherever, as big or as small as I want. How we work really is on two facets. We work on a company wide facet to say, hey, this weekend we're doing X, Y, and Z. And we'll post it on our social medias and we'll post it on, our website once it gets all good to go, and say, hey, this weekend we're going whitewater rafting, or this weekend we're going hang gliding off the Sleeping Bear sand dunes. Everybody is welcome, and there will just be a sign up. There will be a questionnaire to say, hey, what supports do you need? Let's have a conversation about it. How can we make this accessible for you? and we'll do those periodically. Probably in the next couple months, once they get all settled across the country, we'll pick those back up. But there'll be, local things. If it's in California, maybe we do an adaptive surfing lesson and we say, hey, if you want to try surfing today, come out. We'd love to have you. And we'll, of course, have volunteers and experts to meet everybody's needs. As we progress and as I get a little bit settled down, I'd like to do them monthly, you know, whatever they are. It could be anything. It could be as simple as, hey, let's go bowling and let's just have a social meet
Yeah.
and greet or whatever, just to add to the community. And then we also work on individual projects. So people can come to us and say, hey, Sean, I've always wanted to do this. I've always wanted to do X, Y, and Z. And these are more of your bigger projects. So, but yeah, people can reach out to us and say, hey, let's figure this out. I've always wanted to go parachuting, or I've always wanted to go whatever. We're actually working on a project right now, big project, to do a photo shoot in the Bahamas.
Oh,
One of my friends, she's in a wheelchair and she has a couple of different things going on. And she's a model, beautiful, beautiful
mhm.
woman. And, we want to do this photo shoot underwater with sharks and shipwrecks and all this in a full ball gown, just to show,
Do you need a photographer?
yeah, right,
Mm.
right, right. But work individually
Yeah.
and say, hey, we'll figure everything out.
This is your
Um,
dream, we'll make it happen, yeah.
yeah, exactly. And then a couple other bigger projects coming up. We're gonna go climb Mount Kilimanjaro,
Oh
hopefully
gosh.
2 years time.
Oh,
Um, yeah, so we're gonna go climb Mount Kilimanjaro. We're hoping to make a documentary on it. So if anybody
oh,
knows
that'd be
anybody that's
incredible.
in the film industry, again, just to not
Yeah.
to brag about our accolades or anything, but we want to normalize these activities
Yeah.
with people
Yeah,
with
show
disabilities.
people that anybody can do it, yeah.
Right. So that's the goal is we want to have a presence and we want to have, we want to promote positivity towards the disabled community in a positive light. I think the biggest thing for people getting on board and growing this thing and creating an outreach is one, look, let's have a conversation. Reach out to me. I'm basically the only one in the company. We have a board, but I run the whole show.
Yep,
Reach out to us. Our information will be linked somewhere. I'm sure you guys
yep.
and
It'll
on
be
the tech
everywhere.
side.
Yep.
Yeah. Shoot us a DM or an email or whatever and say, hey, I've got this idea in my community. And we could even brand it with the Limitless Project and say, hey,
Mm,
I'll work with you guys if you guys want to tackle a project in your community, or if you guys, want to do a project with us, come out and do one of our weekend things. We're always looking for volunteers. So whatever, event we're having or whatever we need, we'll also have a volunteer section. So there'll be a sign up for people, participants to, participate in whatever. But there'll also be a section for volunteers. And if people want to, volunteer for a project or whatever, we'll go through an interview process. Say, hey, what skills do I need? What skills can you bring? Here's what I'm looking for. Maybe this one will work. Maybe this one will work. Yeah, and then the other thing is just word of mouth. If people, I shouldn't say if people, everybody knows people with disabilities. In some light or another, whether that's autism or a cognitive impairment or a physical impairment. Everybody in their life has somebody, if I mentioned it right now, you're already thinking of that one person or two people or whoever it may be, to say, hey, I learned about this nonprofit, I learned about Sean. Let's figure out what they want to do. And let's just talk about it and spread the word. I think the biggest challenge is just people don't know what they don't know, and it's a cool project and I like to think it's impactful, but people don't know what they don't know. And, to have opportunities like this, I'm sure people would be just dying to get in line for. But if I can't reach them or they can't reach us, then there's a disconnect. So just word of mouth and just spreading it around to say, hey, if you know somebody that would be interested in something like this or a friend of a friend, that's our biggest tool right now is just to, spread our footprint and impact as many people as we can. So
I
that's where
love
we're at
that.
right now. Yeah, a couple of big projects, a couple small projects, but it'll be a little bit before I get settled and then we'll start again. But
Absolutely. I would say Jessica asked and you were answering it as she was asking about setting up projects in other states and where you're gonna be. I know you're in Michigan now, but where you're
yeah,
gonna be located when you're settled. Yeah, I'm really curious about that. And if we wanted to do some, maybe isn't something that we could actually bring you out or go to you,
Yeah.
but are you able to support folks trying
Yeah.
to, if I wanted to take my cousin and do something crazy that I need
Yeah.
support, brainstorming
Absolutely.
how to make happen? Can
Yeah.
you make that happen? Like, how do you
Yeah.
support?
Well, and that's the thing too is I just have so much. I've been doing this for so long. I have such a great network of
Hmm.
people and things and expertise. So
Yeah.
if it's not me physically on the ground, let's still have a conversation about it because I
Yeah.
can either one walk you through it and say, hey, here's what we're gonna need to adapt it. Here's what we're gonna need. I've got contacts here. We can do this. And that's the goal is I want to grow this thing so big in all the states that people are coming to me and it doesn't have to be me
Yep.
at every single opportunity. I want to teach people what I know. I want to, I can only be in
Yep.
so many places at one time. So I want, that's a great talking point is to say, hey, let's have a conversation about it. And I can walk you through all the things that we need to adapt it. And I can set everything up, whether you use the Limitless Project or you want to go through us, that's up to you. But
Hmm.
if you wanna just try something, I can almost guarantee you I know people or know how to do it, or we'll figure it out. That's what we do is we just figure it out. Yeah, great question. I would love for people out of state, all over the world. If you're on a cruise, if you're on a skiing trip in the Rockies, if you're whatever it is, to kind of teach people, to teach people, to teach people, and that's how you grow the company and the network and just impact as many people as you can.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that would be tremendous. If you guys have anybody in mind out of state or want to try something or you even just want to bounce ideas off of me, I have them. I trust me, I have the craziest ideas you can imagine. I just need the people to do it.
Awesome.
Yeah,
Well, there's our call to action, nannies and families, if you're listening. But nannies, we know how to wrap a good mission up and support it. So let's make sure we spread the word about the
yeah.
Limitless Project. Support Sean,
Thank
and if
you.
you know anybody who either could use the Limitless Project and services or support them, somebody who makes adaptive technology who
Yeah,
Sean could connect with, anything like that, please
yeah.
connect them. And thank you so much, Sean. Is there anything else you want to leave our guests with before we close out today?
No, I really appreciate the time today. It's just incredible I could talk about disabilities and all this for hours, but the one thing I wanted to leave everybody with is disabilities never mean inability. It just means that we have to be creative and we have to problem solve. And like I mentioned before, a lot of these people are fighting for their lives. They're fighting a battle that we have no knowledge about, and it's hard. Some of them are medically fighting for their life. Some of them are depressed. Some people have this invisible backpack that we have no idea about, and the least that we can do is just make it a full life, whether that's sharing a laugh or sharing a meal or a memory or creating a crazy opportunity, you know, people are people, and, I don't care what you look like, I don't care what your disability is, we are human at the end of the day. And, I think that's just the most important thing is we're all here on the same planet with the same goal just to win at life.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Sean, for being here. This has been so wonderful. We will get the replay up for soon. And if you are listening to this on the podcast, make sure you check out the Limitless Project. The website and social media will be linked in the show notes. Thank you so
Tremendous.
much.
Tremendous. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
But Jessica does have another question about nanny families. I will say I will partially answer this from Adventure Nannies before I let Sean add anything. We at Adventure Nannies, we don't charge extra for special, special needs searches, anything like that. We have lots of special needs nannies on our roster. It really depends on the level of care. Sometimes when it gets into medical care necessities, it does get a little more complex, but we would be happy to talk. Um, Oh, I'm sorry, I'm reading it backwards. Nanny families that need disability care. See, that is we have the data that say the families are less frequent, but please, please, please submit an application. Shoot me an email at marketing at if you have submitted an application, and I'll pick it up because when we do have those families come in, both from a personal perspective, but also just from a company perspective, it feels important to get those placements right.
Yeah.
So, and make sure that the right nanny's in there. So we always try to make sure that our roster is full of great nannies who can fill those kinds of spots. Have any other agency? I won't knock you. Do you have any other agency recommendations that happen to have these kinds of jobs for disability care often?
Talking to me.
Yeah. I don't know if you
Honestly, I've applied. So it's funny. I've applied actually to 161 jobs. Being a male is disadvantageous in the community, and especially being so niche. And my expertise is pretty intense for disabilities. I've seen it all. Adventure Nannies has been the best. Honestly, I've applied through several agencies. Most of them don't give you the time of day. Disabilities are a very niche area, especially in the nanny world, and each family is looking for something different. But what I've found is Adventure Nannies has been they've taken it all in and catered to all the families, whether they're neurotypical or have disabilities. It really is finding the right fit. The family will find exactly what they're looking for. And I feel like Adventure Nannies has done a very good job of creating that pool to say, hey, we've got X, Y, and Z for you, you know. Yeah, it's not a paid intern, it's not a paid
I was gonna
but
we're probably we
no,
didn't pay him to
Adventure
say
Nanny
that, but no,
yeah,
that means a lot.
Adventure Nannies truly has been the best, most communicative, even from the very start. It's just tremendous. You hear from real people, like
We
the real
promise nobody's AI. We
yes.
just some people think that some of our candidate team are like
Yeah,
bots responding to them. They're real
yeah,
people. They're just really that nice.
yeah.
Promise.
It's been tremendous. It really has been a journey, and it's just every process is it's up and down. It's a job, a very lucrative job, and, I just have to say Adventure Nannies has been tremendous through the whole process, so
Well, thank you. Our entire team just loves you, Sean, and thank you for your time.
yeah,
I really appreciate it, and
of course.
we'll talk soon.
Okay, very
Okay,
good.
thanks.
Thanks for having me.